Well, hello there, and welcome back to Edgier Than Thou. Today we have an interesting topic. This video is going to have a long-ish intro, and if by some miracle your name is TJ Kirk, fear not, for you are mentioned several times in said intro. Of course, since I consider myself infinitely more important and valuable than you could ever aspire to be, I am mentioned slightly more. Anyhow, for the last couple of months here, I've been occasionally dipping into the content of The Amazing Atheist, a channel I imagine many of you are familiar with to some degree. I've found TJ's recent content interesting in how it's changed since previous iterations, and in how his focus has undeniably shifted. I still object to a lot of what he said, but I find TJ to be an interesting topic of study because I've always gotten the impression that he's honest about his feelings. Note that I did not say honest in his engagement or honest in his facts. More on that later. Nonetheless, in contrast to many other anti-SJW YouTubers, I think that TJ's put a lot of himself into his work, and it's given all of us some impression of how he views himself in the world, unlike others who've made their entire brand about just being the worst person imaginable with zero context.
I think it depends on the child, really, doesn't it?
Since I've been watching some of TJ's most recent content, I had the opportunity to see his video, Will Steve Shives Ever Forgive Me? And it annoyed the shit out of me in a variety of ways. Let's get this out of the way. I have literally no interest in litigating whether TJ ought to be forgiven, whatever that might mean in this context. It's not really my place to discuss, not because I'm a cis, straight, white man, at least one of those traits isn't me, but because I personally find the concept of forgiving a content creator so profoundly boring that I can hardly bother myself with thinking much deeper into it at the moment. Not to say that it isn't an important conversation, it's just not one that I ought to be having at the moment. As such, I'm going to be talking about this in a bit of a peculiar way. This is sort of a strange experience for me, as this content very clearly shaped a lot of my understandings at a younger age, and to a degree has continued to influence my instincts on certain issues, although I'd certainly say that my thinking is infinitely more mature, and I've done my best to keep what good existed and expel the bad. I'm going to do my best to talk about TJ's content in a vaguely sociological sense, which is to say that I'm going to discuss the rationale behind his language and the context it was placed in. I want to make clear at the outset that when I say something makes sense, I do not mean that it is good or correct. I simply mean that I understand the context in which these arguments were expressed. I find a lot of this pretty friggin' reprehensible. In this video, I'm going to talk about what I consider to be basic content creator etiquette. TJ has made it clear fairly recently that at the time that many of his old videos were made, this was not a major concern of his. This is incredibly relevant to this conversation, as TJ's platform objectively contributed to the vile mistreatment of random feminists online. TJ bears a meaningful degree of responsibility for this alongside others, whether he meant it that way or not. Yes, he didn't know the significance of his platform then. He does now, hence why he probably ought to apologize to some of these content creators for the shit that he helped put them through. I will also, in this video, call some of TJ's takes racist and likely other similar terms. If you can't handle the idea that I used a negative word about a person you agree with, get over yourself, snowflake. That ought to win them over. Oh, also, I legitimately could not care less about the relationship between TJ and Steve Shives. I have not, to my knowledge, ever once watched a Steve Shives video that wasn't like placed in somebody else's content. I don't care. I cannot stress to you how much I don't care.
And you're right, I don't care about your forgiveness or the forgiveness of anybody who feels they might have been wronged by my content at any point, unless I truly felt like I had wronged them. So if someone can make a compelling case about how I've seriously and severely wronged them, then maybe I would seek that person's forgiveness, or maybe I wouldn't, I don't know. But I don't feel like anyone can make that case, or has made that case, so
Those of you who were online in 2013 to 16-ish will remember Anita Sarkeesian as someone who frequently drew the ire of anti-feminists on the internet. TJ himself made several videos on Sarkeesian and frequently portrayed her as not only an unreasonable feminist, but also as an actively bad person. In the very video I'm responding to here, he refers to her as a
scamming bitch.
Funnily enough, in his response to Steve Shives here, he also has to defend himself against scamming accusations.
We'd have to take TJ's word for it, and we know how trustworthy he is with money, so...
Shut up. You don't know a damn thing. I hate all this stupid nonsense. You know how the internet is, bro. You know that any little thing that you do gets run through the grist of all these people who hate you.
I'm inclined to believe him when he says that everything at least was intended to be above board, even though it's undeniably the case that at the bare minimum, on the surface, some of the stuff he did sure does look like scamming. Now, personally, I'm not privy to Anita Sarkeesian's finances, but we do have the benefit of hindsight, and we have the ability to look back at some of the things that TJ said and consider for ourselves whether or not they were reasonable. Do note that what I'm talking about here is not just one-off thing that TJ said. He made it very clear that he believed Anita Sarkeesian to be an active scammer and continues to believe that to this day. So let's look at a video entitled Anita Sarkeesian, You Officially Suck at Feminism.
If you read the description, she calls it the debut episode of our series on positive female characters. Here's an idea, Anita. Maybe you should finish the Tropes vs. Women in Video Games series that you started back in June of 2012. You know, the one that you raised $158,922 for?
TJ is using the fact that Anita Sarkeesian apparently started a brand new video series after she was supposed to be working on the first one that she raised money for as evidence that she must have been scamming people out of their money. If you look at TJ's screen, you will see Positive Female Characters is already a video in the Feminist Frequency series. The very thing that TJ is complaining that Anita isn't doing, she is doing in this video. But this is what I mean when I say that he's honest in his feelings. I genuinely believe that he believes what he's saying here, but he's undeniably letting the fact that he hates Anita Sarkeesian completely blind him to literally words on the page that he put in his video. I don't think he's outright lying, but he is being dishonest. But what's interesting to me is that if TJ is frustrated that people continue to accuse him of being a scammer, even though I would argue there's more evidence in favor of that than Anita Sarkeesian being a scammer, as a reminder, she did exactly what she said she was going to do. You would think that he would maybe have higher standards for accusing people of doing this really crappy thing. But instead, in the past, he based at least some of his arguments on complete bullshit evidence and thus far seems unwilling to issue a correction. This is a claim you made about Anita Sarkeesian that is provably wrong in the video that you made the claim. This is the kind of thing that you should probably apologize for. TJ's been very quick to dismiss the idea that he's done some sort of 180 in his content.
But have I done a 180? Not by a long shot. I've made some mild course corrections because I didn't understand the power of the influence I was wielding. And I didn't understand how, you know, these like very regressive far right-wing sort of figures were going to repurpose this anti-SJW content and use it as something to attack the left in this ridiculous culture war narrative that they push.
And he's also made it clear that
I don't really feel like I super disagree with most of the stuff I put up.
So I think it's important to remember some of the stuff that he said. Just to be clear, I don't especially care about the quality of the arguments that he's responding to. I care about his response and whether or not that's meaningful.
I'll be honest with you, if I hate anything about black culture, it's that it's such a victim culture, almost a victim cult.
All right, this is an objectively racist perspective. I imagine that TJ would agree with me if he were to hear this coming from Candace Owens. In fact, he made a video responding to Candace Owens recently and didn't hold back, made it very clear that he thought that she was a piece of shit.
Do you honestly think the structure of America is not based on racism?
I do not think the structure of America is based on racism. If it were, there would be no black four-star generals, no black Secretary of States, no black president, no black Supreme Court justices, no major black entertainers, no black scientists.
I don't especially feel the need to argue with or debunk this point. I imagine that TJ would agree that this is a stupid and racist opinion. That by making up a fake version of systemic racism with no basis in data, he's just making a racist ass out of himself. And it's freaking annoying because it really genuinely seems like his perspectives are improved and are more reasoned now than they were at the time. But like, he continues to pretend like it was all okay or was all an acceptable form of discourse, and it wasn't. He said dumb stuff. He responded to dumb people sometimes, sure, and then he said incredibly unintelligent, unreasonable things in response to them. But beyond that, he made aggressive accusations about the people that he was responding to that may possibly have contributed to a toxic culture and may have potentially contributed to those people getting harassed.
Why isn't racism illegal?
Well, you'd better thank your lucky stars it isn't, or all of you would be locked up.
Personally, I think the way that TJ treated people in his videos is enough for him to say, hey, sorry, I was an asshole to you, far beyond what you deserved. This doesn't require taking back every word ever said, but it does require you to realize that someone like Milo Stewart made silly and sometimes imperfect explainer videos. They did nothing to deserve being called a bigot or some of the other disgusting things that TJ said about them in videos such as transgender bigots hate speech. Don't want to play those bits here, but a good timestamp to check out in that video might be 4 minutes and 55 seconds. Even so, what's infinitely more important is what people were inspired to do because of TJ's behavior. We can probably all agree that on average, fans of a content creator are going to be a bit less reserved and a bit more excessive than the content creator themselves. So it's worth considering the things TJ said and acknowledge the possibility that maybe others replicated that behavior. In 2012, TJ was criticized for genuinely horrific comments he made to a rape victim on Reddit. Before going any further, I understand the phenomenon that led to such comments. In fact, it's the basis for my channel name, although no, I will not elaborate on that at this time. I understand why his language got so out of hand. There is a culture on the internet, especially back then, that rewarded consistently one-upping each other in terms of shock value and finding the most vile and cruel things to say in an effort to constantly be as polarizing as possible. Nonetheless, this behavior is fucking horrendous. TJ, of course, apologized for what was said in a way that was not especially satisfying, but nonetheless at least recognized that what he said was wrong. The problem is, you kinda can't unring that bell. Once you as a content creator have behaved in such a manner, your fans take that as license to do it on your behalf. Folks like Anita Sarkeesian have claimed that they got violent threats, demands for suicide, and, you know, the other kind of threat that women get online as a result of how TJ covered them, and it's not hard to see why. When you've established this precedent of absolutely no boundaries in terms of the language that you use to refer to people, your followers are going to take it upon themselves to keep doing that work. Many of them are going to assume that you only apologize to save face and haven't actually changed your thinking on the matter. TJ, when Anita, Milo, Steve, Francesca, etc. get violent threats, you hold responsibility. Yes, the people making the threats are culpable for their behavior, but they never would have done what they did unless you set a precedent for such threats being at least acceptable in discourse. Then called attention to these individuals for being supposedly terrible people, which signals to your audience that they deserve it. You could have worked to mitigate this. You could have consistently continued to uphold that these people do not deserve harassment and that you are not interested in cultivating a community that treats people the way they did, but you seem to prefer to wash your hands of it rather than get over yourself and realize you did a bad thing. As I said, I understand that you weren't thinking about this in 2014, but it's 2023 now. You should be able to look back and realize that you hurt people, not just their triggered libcuck feelings. You actively contributed to creating a culture that made these people fear for their safety. That warrants an apology. I could probably go a bit more in depth on some specific examples, but I don't really think that that's essential to this. If you're not familiar with The Amazing Atheist or his content or whatever, then this video isn't really for you. This is mostly for people who have seen this stuff or know that it exists. If you were watching TJ in 2015, you know what I'm talking about, and I feel like that's good enough for now. So, I think we've established that TJ made unwarranted accusations against people and said and did stuff he ought to correct or regret, regardless of whether he keeps himself up at night self-flagellating. But still, I think it's important to explain why this is so frustrating to me. If this were someone like Sargon of Akkad or Dr. Shame, I probably wouldn't be talking about him like this. I get the impression that TJ isn't an unabashedly evil person, but that doesn't change the fact that he did a fuckload of harm to the YouTube space. I don't really care whether he cries himself to sleep over it. It would just be nice to get some level of, yeah, I perpetuated a lot of toxic bullshit, and it's now important that I counteract it. Not just other people reappropriated the things I said. No, I hold culpability for this explicitly. I don't care whether he gives people money, but there are a few basic steps he ought to take, not because he's a sinner in need of forgiveness, but because he has the capacity to do great good or great harm. 1, apologize to the people who were harmed by your actions. I'm not of the opinion that you need to take back every single disagreement you had, but apologize for the objectively wrong accusations you made and for directly giving others license to send death threats to them. You ought to do this regardless of whether they take back things you consider to be unfair about yourself. 2nd, unlist most of the old stuff and put it on a playlist. You mentioned this as a possible solution in your video, and that is, as far as I can tell, the absolute best solution. No need to rewrite history, but also no pushing people into harmful culture war bullshit. Whether any person watching this video has any interest in watching TJ Kirk ever again, if they did to begin with, he's not leaving the internet anytime soon, and it would be genuinely nice if he made certain that his platform consistently made the world better rather than worse. Most of his new content, I think, is fairly good, but we need to leave 2016 behind if we want to do this right. TJ's right in saying that he's a unique voice on this platform and that he has an interesting personality that most other people don't replicate, and I don't expect any sort of massive change to that personality. And to some degree, I think that might even be a good thing. But there's a line between maintaining your persona and keeping consistent and just actively allowing yourself to do bad shit. I think this is unabashedly in the latter category. Anyhow, if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, clarifications, etc., feel free to let me know in the comments. the direction of this video changed a lot, and so I'm worried that we might be in a little bit of like a Suicide Squad sort of situation where it feels like two videos grappling with each other. Hopefully that's not how it came out, but I guess we'll see. And yeah, I appreciate the liking of this video. I appreciate the subscribing of this YouTube channel, and you should check me out on Twitter at edgier-than, there's no thou, or follow me on Instagram at edgier-than-thou. I don't know why I said or, you can do both. But yeah, I'll see you on the next one.